Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I will tell you that it's not my normal venue. And I have to say that I asked, what should I speak about? And they pretty much said, whatever you want. That is one of the most empowering and intimidating things you can tell a public speaker. It's particularly when and you have 30 minutes and 1,000 people. Oh, okay. But they did ask me they wanted me to talk about something I thought would be of interest to you and to weave in a little bit about what it has been like, or what it was like, to represent the fourth largest city in the United States, 2.2 million constituents, as an out LGBT official, and what I am doing today at the Victory Fund and the Victory Institute. And I'm going to touch on the Victory Fund and Institute just a moment. I was in a lovely introduction. We are the only national organization devoted solely to helping elect LGBT people to public office. And we're the only organization of any kind that works with people up and down the ballot. We are as excited to elect someone to a school board as we are the fact that we just elected 2 LGBT governors here in the United States. So we have 2 sides of the house. We have the fund, which is a PAC, and we have the Institute, which is a C3 organization that does candidate training. If you've ever thought about running for office, you need to contact us. And we also have a pretty amazing internship on Capitol Hill that we offer 12 slots for every year, a paid internship. So it's a lot of great stuff. And the final thing of my commercial about Victory is that there were more than 750 openly LGBT candidates for office in November, or in 2018. There are more than 650 openly LGBT elected officials in office today. The comprehensive list of those officials is on the Victory Institute website, and it's also under something called Out for America map. And if you do an internet search of an Out for America, you will find a list. You can slice and dice it any way you want. Show me the governors, and Jared Polis and Kate Brown will pop up, or you can say, show me everybody who's been elected in Illinois. And we'll go down the list. And it's exciting and empowering to see it. I will only say that if we are 4% of the population, we have 23,000 more people to elect. Job security for me. When I became mayor of Houston in 2009, it made worldwide news. I got a little box on the front page of the Times of India. Mayors of Houston don't normally make the front page of the Times of India, but there was this big thing, lesbian and Houston, and people couldn't put the two together. Yes, it is a conservative, fairly conservative city and a conservative state, but what people didn't realize is that by the time I became mayor of Houston, I'd already been elected citywide in Houston 6 times. I was the safe, familiar candidate. And before I was ever elected, I was a council member and controller before I became mayor, and before I was ever elected a council member, I spent 20 years as an active community volunteer building community within the city of Houston. But it was kind of cool. The Time magazine accolade was great, but getting a shout out from Rachel Maddow was kind of, yeah, I was a joke. Jay Leno made a joke about my race, and Jon Stewart gave me a shout out on The Daily Show, but Rachel Maddow, that was still living with me on that one. But in my new role as Victory, I have an opportunity to help elect that next generation of leaders who will shape the political life of this country, but also the daily life of Americans. And one of my overarching messages to you is that it is important to be engaged in the broader community. But let me take a step back before I go there. And as I was thinking about what am I going to talk about, I fell back on 3 recent experiences I had. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked to participate in diversity panels. So last week I was on a diversity panel again, and the question was raised, why are we Americans still so divided? but also why we still struggle with things like racism and difficulties in relating to people who are different. And to be frank, part of it is how we are hardwired as animals, as beings. And that is that we are classifiers. We put the things around us in the world into groups. We drop them into buckets. And there's some animals that have like food, not food, and danger. We're a little more complicated than that, but it's more like family, clan, tribe, stranger, enemy. And stranger, enemy can be pretty close to each other. And I'm sorry if I'm going fast for the signer over there. But what we need to do is what we need to do is try to figure out how to get people from that stranger enemy, almost one category, into more of the toward the tribe category. But you're going to tell me, but I work with someone of who's a different race, or I have a friend who is a different faith, or a different culture, and we're cool. But here's how human beings do that. We make exceptions. We say, I know you, I like you, and instead of then saying, therefore others of your ilk are also going to be cool and likable, we don't make that. We subconsciously say, I like you, you must be the exception. And so we have to work as human beings on broadening our experiences and deepening our connections so that more and more of those who are different than we are in that category that we can relate to. The next thing is, next conversation I had, next experience, was with Representative Lamont Robinson, who just became the first African-American LGBT member of the Illinois House. Really, really great guy. But Lamont shared with me an experience. He talked about being a freshman in college in Atlanta. He's from Chicago. He went to Atlanta to go to college. And he was struggling with his sexuality and how and whether to come out, and am I really gay? What do I do with all these feelings? And he finally couldn't talk to his mother about it or his friends, and he wrote to his pastor back home in Chicago. There's the pregnant pause here. And he poured out his pain and his confusion to his pastor. And the pastor wrote back a 3-page letter. And here it is, 20 years later, and Lamont has tears in his eyes, and I teared up as well. And he said the letter was exactly what you'd hope and what he needed at that time. Instead of preaching, his pastor reassured him and guided him. His pastor said that Lamont was valued. He assured Lamont that God loved him. And he was given a list of resources where he could find supportive information as he sorted out his life. It wasn't that his pastor necessarily thought or approved of him coming out, but he wanted to support him because it was his search and his journey and his decision. Lamont looked at me and said, had he received any other response, he would not have been sitting there with me. That letter changed the course of his life. It allowed him to see a future. He actually went on to become the student body president of his college. He returned to Chicago and built a business, and now he is in elective office. It's not what I may need that's important. It's what you may need that's important. And it might surprise you to know that the pastor who gave Lamont so much hope was Jeremiah Wright. Some of you may know him from the controversy around, he's also Obama's pastor. And there was some comments that he made that put him in the limelight. But he did exactly what you would want and need a pastor to do. And then the third thing that happened to me is that prior to the elections, a little bit farther back, someone asked me about Victory's engagement with communities of faith, and they specifically around the religious component of winning a race. And the quote was, we need to engage evangelicals. What are you going to do about it? Now, see what he did? And go back to that first conversation. He created categories immediately. Politically active members of the LGBT community are in one bucket, and evangelicals, all evangelicals, are in another bucket. And of course, the subtext is that there's some magic conversation that we're going to have that if we only say the right thing, we're all going to come together and everything's going to be right. Be nice. It's not the way the world works. And my answer to that person is that, of course, I was very reasoned, and I sent him a long letter back, and each race is a unique set of components centered around the skills and strengths of a candidate and focused on issues of greatest weight with the voters, and I went on, and tried to explain to him that there's not a magic formula, and we're not going to ask a candidate who may not already be part of a faith community to suddenly engage at that level. And what we saw in these elections in this last year is that candidates won all over the country, and they won in amazing places. And you thought, Houston was conservative. How about rural Kansas? How about Nebraska? We won in those places, but we won in those places because people were embedded in community. They were known in community. They had relationships, and they talked about things that were important in their community. They didn't actually, national politics brought people out to run, but national politics is not where they ran. It's not what they talked about, and it's not why they were successful. So it's important to understand that if we're going to be successful in any of the things we want to do as a community, we have to be able to find places of intersection. I won 9 citywide races in Houston. I was reelected mayor 3 times. It wasn't a fluke. There's some people who tell you that it was, but it wasn't a fluke. I was successful because I had already engaged in communities of faith across the city on issues of homelessness or food insecurity, police brutality, payday lenders, all sorts of things, having nothing to do with whether I was an out lesbian or not. And I wasn't just a candidate who happened to be out. I was actually one of the most visible lesbian activists in the city of Houston for the 20 years before I was elected to office. I'm 62 years old. I'm looking pretty good for 62, thank you. I attended my first LGBT organizing event in 1975. I've been in this space for a very long time. It was part of my public persona and my resume, but they knew me because we had worked together. And I'll tell you a story about something that happened on the campaign. I'm running for city council, I'm campaigning all over the city, but I was still trying to work, and I worked in the oil industry. Worked in the oil industry for the 20 years I was an active volunteer. I had a job, worked for a conservative Republican oil man in the oil industry, and I put on my suit every day and went to work. And I was just leaving the house to head to the office, and my campaign called, and they said, the Baptist ministers of Houston and vicinity are endorsing today. It's an African-American group, and it was an influential endorsement. And they said, you need to go and screen. And I said, well, it's not on my calendar. And they said, well, that's okay. That's because they didn't invite you. I'm like, why the heck am I going? Because you can get this endorsement if you show up. I promise you, it'll work. Just go and sign in as if you were invited and as if you belong, and they'll screen you, and it'll be fine. I cannot tell you what my stomach was doing at that moment. But I went back in. I femmed up a little bit, I'll confess. Put a dress on, I fluffed my hair a little bit. I went and I did exactly what they said. I signed in. And I sat there for a while I'm sure they had an interesting conversation about what to do with me. But they let me in, and they screened me, and we talked about issues of importance to the city. And they never once talked about the fact that they knew I was a lesbian, and I knew they knew I was a lesbian. And I left. And about a week later, they called me, and they told me that they had decided to endorse me. And I was like over the moon that they had decided to endorse me. They did say that they were going to endorse me and they were going to endorse somebody, one of my opponents as well. There was a multi-candidate race because one of their members was also on the ballot. I mean, that said a lot to me, that I had made a connection with them enough that they were going to dual endorse me and a fellow Baptist minister. And I said, oh, this is wonderful. I'm gonna use the heck out of this endorsement. And another week went by, and they had a big press conference planned for all of their endorsed candidates to show up and to be presented to the city of Houston. And I got there, and I start walking in, and I see another candidate that I knew having a screaming fit in the parking lot. And what's going on? Well, they had unendorsed him. And I'm like, oh, they do that? And one of the things they had said, in order to receive the endorsement, you had to be part of their advertising campaign, and so they asked me to bring a check. So I had a $1,000 check in my hand, which at that point was probably about 20% of my campaign funds. And I had a photographer in tow because I wanted some pictures of this. And so I thought, oh, okay, I prepped myself. And two of the ministers met me as I was walking in, and they're very somber, and they said, we have some bad news for you. We have decided to unendorse you. Now, I'd already had the example of the guy having the screaming fit in the parking lot, who was not gay, by the way. And so I had like all of about 2 minutes to get ready for this. And so I said, I understand that you have difficulty with me being an open lesbian. I understand that you struggle with issues of faith around this, and I understand how big a deal it was that you were wanting to endorse me. And I also understand if you can't. But let's talk about what is possible. They told me they were gonna just dual endorse their member and not endorse me, and I said, I understand that too. He's one of you guys. You're going to have to look at him next time you have a meeting. I understand that. But he's not going to make it into the runoff, and I will. And that's one of the reasons that you chose originally to support me. So let's promise each other that if I make the runoff and he doesn't, that I'll have another opportunity to come to you and ask for your support. And as a gesture of my good faith in you as men of integrity, I'm going to leave this check with you. And I'm going to trust that you won't deposit that check unless you decide to endorse me. And if you decide not to endorse me, you can just tear it up. But if you think we have an opportunity for the future, you hold on to that. He didn't make the runoff, I did, and they cashed that check. So, but that is about, in order to receive trust, you have to give trust. And you have to not be ashamed of who you are. I had brought everything I was to them, and I was going to stand in front of them, and they were going to accept or not. But I wasn't going to pretend something I wasn't. And one of the things that opened up, though, is receiving that endorsement, is that in that race, I campaigned in African-American churches. And I found out how much I hated campaigning in that way. And not because it was a terrible experience. I will tell you, though, that every church, some of you know how the circuit works. 5 churches in a Sunday, and you go as a little pack, and you're there 10 minutes, and preacher introduces you to the congregation, and you run out the door, and you go to the next church, and it happens over and over again. I did that one campaign, and I decided that it was disrespectful to the congregations, and I wasn't going to do it again. But I also will tell you that every church I walked into that time, I was afraid that someone was going to attack me. And you get enough adrenaline rushes in a campaign, you don't need that extra stress. But it never happened. And I was in churches over and over again. And one of the things I decided to do in later years, and not to campaign in the faith community, but to be in the faith community. And that I was particularly diligent about it when I was mayor, but one Sunday of every month, I attended a different church, stayed for the entire service, mingled with the congregants before and after. First few times I did it, it was like a big deal, because I couldn't believe she's still here. And I was walking out of a black church one Sunday, and I went to churches from different communities, but I was walking out of a black church, and there was this gaggle of women in front of me, and one of them looked at the others and said, "I have seen a miracle today." It's a politician who came and stayed. I'm like, yes, it worked. She knew I was there, and she knew I cared enough to be in that community and to have the conversations and to stay. You know, one of some of the negatives around my experience as mayor of Houston, Westboro Baptist Church from Kansas picketed my first inauguration. Actually, I think it's probably a badge of honor that they did that. The repeal of the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, our non-discrimination ordinance, was organized and led by 5 right-wing pastors in the city of Houston. There was a guy who showed up every Friday at noon with a shofar, and he blew his horn and asked God to strike me dead. Good thing it didn't happen, I wouldn't be able to speak to you tonight. On the positive, I was welcomed in churches every month throughout the community. I hosted an annual Ramadan iftar with thousands of devout Muslims from all the mosques in Houston. The LDS Church was the coordinator of volunteers for my disaster recovery program, on and on and on. Huge engagement from the faith communities in the work that I did. And on the night, or the day that I was sworn in first as mayor of Houston, Joel Osteen, who has one of the largest megachurches, if not the largest megachurch in America, Lakewood Church, gave my inaugural prayer. And an interesting thing happened when Joel Osteen gave my prayer. He was attacked by folks on the right, and I was attacked by folks on the left. Like, how could you? And without talking to each other, we both gave the very same answer. And that is, we came together around my inauguration because it was about the city and not about us. We were one city, and we have to work together. And it was important for the largest church in my city to be a part of moving into the government of the future. Politicians talking about their faith is, it's kind of rampant right now. And, it used to be the tenet of Republican candidates that the louder and longer they could profess their faith, the better. And I'm going to tell you, it's not very pretty when it comes from the Democrats either. And I find this really troubling. And it's not troubling to me that people bring their faith into their daily lives. What is troubling is that the professions of faith seem to be louder the closer they get to a microphone. That's not what we were taught, and that's not how it works. And this interest in the religious affiliation of public officials is a little bit frustrating. There, some groups seeming to make it a litmus test for support, that as if it were synonymous with morality. Does a particular faith tradition or a church affiliation matter more than what are a candidate's core beliefs, and will they defend those core beliefs? What is more important, what they value and how they show it, or where they give their religious membership, their faith membership, what church? How do they make their decisions? Who do they listen to? Who do they hear? That's what I want to know. I don't really want to know where you choose to worship. I want to know how you approach the world and what matters to you and how you make your decisions. And that, if that is how we define faith, that is important in the public realm. Faith doesn't fail us. The church may fail us. People of the church may fail us. Human beings are social animals. We seek community. And by seeking community in as many different ways as possible, we make ourselves stronger, we make the world stronger. But participation in public life is not just a right, it is a responsibility. And some of us get so engaged in things that we think are vitally important maybe it's on the job, maybe it's in your faith community. Maybe it's in your neighborhood. Maybe you participate in the school board or the PTA, and that's the most important thing. As long as we are participating in the broader community, we have both a civic and a secular responsibility that goes beyond what we do as matters of faith. We bring our faith with us, but we have to engage. And I'm going to ask you, as you engage going forward, that you really think about what we as LGBT people have been working on for so long. Remember, I told you I attended my first organizing event in 1975. And I know there are a lot of people in this room that weren't alive then, but some of you were. And in the early days of my activism, I'll have a confession to make. I used to go around and I said that there is no such thing as the gay agenda. I want to see what a gay agenda looks like. Okay. There is no such thing. I used to say, some of you are old enough to remember everybody talk about, on the right, they would talk about the gay agenda. And what I have discovered after 40 years of doing this is that, okay, and maybe I should say this quietly, there is a gay agenda. I didn't tell the truth, and it was inadvertent, but I'm going to tell you what the gay agenda is. It's no longer a secret. I want you to know what the gay agenda is, because I want you to help spread the LGBTQ agenda, because that used to be the gay agenda, and now it's the rainbow agenda. But what is the agenda? We want to go to school without being bullied. We want to be able to walk down any street in America without being assaulted. We want to exercise our right to privacy in our own home with the adult partners of our choice. We want to serve our country honorably in the military. We want to work at jobs we love so we can pay taxes to our country. We want to protect the relationships that nurture us through the bonds of marriage. We want to grow and strengthen our families through adoption. We want to live without anybody trying to cure us, because we are whole and healthy as we are. And I've had to add something else to the gay agenda, the LGBTQ agenda, and that is, darn it, some of us just want to pee in private and in peace. That's the agenda. How subversive is that? How frightening is that? How mainstream is that? That is the agenda. And we have to start talking about it, and some of those things we have achieved. But all we have to do is look at this last 2 years to see that things that we thought we had achieved and that were ours and that would sustain us going forward can be swept away very quickly. So we can't stop. We can't let up. And I'm going to leave you with a reminder. I've been hearing a lot of the quote lately as people process the current administration, and they fall back on that Martin Luther King Jr. quote. And it's a great quote, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And people say that like it's magical thinking. The arc of the moral universe is long, and it'll bend toward justice. We just have to be patient. No, that's not how it works. The arc of the moral universe is long, and it has bent toward justice. But it's bent toward justice because generation after generation have placed their hand on that arc and moved it toward justice. Person after person, generation after generation. And for our community, we have to continue to do that as well. We're not asking for our rights. We are human beings. We have rights. All human beings have rights. We are claiming our rights. I heard a story a long time ago, and maybe you'll enjoy this story, and that is, y'all are used to hearing about parables. I'll give you one. Every village should have a sage, someone wise, someone who could offer advice. In the village I'm thinking about, there's a sage. And everyone came to that sage for help, for advice, for consolation. And every village, unfortunately, too, has a bully, has someone who's out to hurt others and is not willing to work in community to make things better. In the village I'm thinking about, the bully decided that he was going to embarrass the sage. And so he came to the village square where this wise woman was sitting, and people were listening to her, and he said, I have a question for you, and I want you to answer this question. He swaggered up there. And the bully, if you see me, I'm putting my hands together, the bully cupped his hands, had his hands cupped like this, and he said, all I want you to do is answer this question. I want you to tell me whether what I hold in my hands is alive or not alive. Simple question. Is it alive or not alive? And the sage, the wise woman, thought for a very, very long time. She looked at the bully and she finally said, I can't say whether what you hold in your hands is alive or not alive. I said, aha! She can't say. I've tricked her. I've trumped this. Because what he had in his hands, he had a butterfly. And if she had said, what you hold in your hands is alive, without anybody being able to tell, he would have just pressed his hands together. And that butterfly would have died. But if she said it's not alive, he just opened his hands and the butterfly would fly away. And so he's beginning to gloat, and the wise woman said, no, wait a minute. I cannot say whether what you hold in your hands is alive or not alive. What I can say is that the answer is in your hands. Our whole future is in our hands. And where we choose to place our hands to work, to place our hands to pray, to place our hands to move forward, to place our hands in someone else's hand, shapes the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let us move forward hand in hand together as people of faith. Thank you.